You're warmly welcome to today's event. We gathered here today to share with you findings from a pilot study that we undertook to understand the rapidly changing technology and media space and the implications for media business models and democracy. Now, this project was supposed to be a 6 months short pilot project, but it is taking a bit longer than that for us to complete, but we are really happy to be here today to share the findings with you. Ladies and gentlemen, the presence of the media and independent press is a foundational component of a healthy radio, television, internet to inform their choice of candidates or hold people accountable or just participate in the day-to-day governance process. But while the freedom and independence are essential for mass media in a democracy, the quality and the credibility of news sources are also important assets. We know, for example, that radio and television, even though they are prominent forms, they are be reducing as a share of their consumption of many audiences. Internet, for example, doubled between, internet access doubled between 2012 and 2017. And I'm sure when we check the data today, it will even be a larger share in terms of the consumption of media. At the same time, technological space for consuming news is rapidly changing with various mobile and online platforms enabling an intense diffusion of news online, almost to the point of making everyone a journalist of a sort. I recall I used to complain to Samuel Dami, the producer of Newsfile, and this was before the COVID hit, about why panelists couldn't join conversations via Zoom and other forms of communication. And there was this insistence that you had to be in the studio because you needed to get the pictures and all of that stuff. Then, of course, the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, people were zooming in and expanding access to all kinds of panelists who were living even outside of Ghana. Unfortunately, this new journalism in most cases lacks the safeguards of traditional journalism, like your National Media Commission or your journalist associations, your editorial teams in the media houses. And with more and more Ghanaians relying on online news, the challenge of fact-checking and peer reviewing is becoming daunting. Unfortunately, when data... Hello? Where data collection and investigative capacities are limited. These changing technology dynamics have also been overwhelming for governments who are worried about state security. In response, governments have struggled to balance facilitating free speech and thought, safeguarding the public, and being accountable. It's essential to examine the impacts of technology and changing media space, also on media business models, if we want to sustain a free and independent media that promotes a healthy democracy. It is imperative for media owners and media supporters to pay serious attention to the media business and ensure that it's sustainable. It's part of the reasons why we identify GIBA right from the beginning as an important stakeholder. Let me take the opportunity to thank Mr. Atukwame Nadazi for his role as a project coordinator and researcher, and the researchers who led the study. Also to thank Professor Gajepo for her leadership of the advisory committee and for leading the draft report review. I also want to thank the members of the advisory committee for their dedication and interest in the project despite its delays. And finally, to show our gratitude to Open Society Foundation Africa for their willingness to support the study. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation and being here today to add to the body of knowledge. And I look forward to all the deliberations and the recommendations that will come out from the discussions. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Atu Kamnadazi. I've been the project coordinator, and I'm here to present an overview of the project, and I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. So, my very good friend, Honorable Minister of Information, Kojopo Nkrumah, Honorable Deputy Minister, Dr. Audrey Gajepo, all protocol observed. At the start of my career as a journalist, the media landscape was very easy to navigate. To begin with, there were very few radio stations, and most of them were in the urban centers of Accra, Kumasi, and Takoradi. In Takoradi, where I come from, there was one state-owned radio station. We called it Twin City Radio. And in Accra, where I came to attend journalism school, I could count the number of radio stations in the city on my fingers. I could name them and add their frequencies. And if you pushed me hard enough, I will name their owners, about 3 of them, including our good old station of the nation. That was just a little over 20 years ago, but I'm not that old. I just started very young. Today, the media landscape has become a very confusing maze. It's almost like a forest with difficult to identify tree species, too many to count, and almost impossible to tell why some of them exist and whom or what they serve. Now, I can't even tell how many radio stations there are in Kokomemle, not to mention the entire city of Accra. It seems the TV stations have also become so easy to set up, with a good number of our TV channels filled with political vitriol, questionable religious fare, and foreign junk. As if that were not enough, thanks to the internet of the nation, to do some 2 decades ago, it's now a very elementary task for anyone with a smartphone and an okay internet connection. In this new labyrinthine media landscape, it is easy to be deceived. You need to be on a very high state of alert to be able to distinguish between the real and the imagined, because it's very easy for anyone to churn out and spread untruth about anyone and anything. All these are happening at a time when revenues are squeezed and most media houses cannot afford to pay their journalists well and retain them, not to mention funding serious investigations to unravel, explain, and help resolve the issues that matter most to us as Ghanaians. So when CDD mooted the idea of commissioning a study to research aspects of this maze, that is the Ghanaian media, there was absolutely no hesitation on my part when I was asked to join the project. The study covered the following 3 thematic areas: the rapidly evolving media environment, which examined the current media landscape, challenges associated with the media freedom versus accountability, and implications for democratic consolidation. 2, business models and sustainability of media houses, which explored revenue sources and funding for media houses to establish challenges to sustainability, particularly in an era where the internet has become a blessing and a curse for media outlets, not only in Ghana, but around the world as well. And 3, the emerging threat posed by expanding internet use, which evaluated both the problems and potential benefits arising from expanding internet media consumption. The study was undertaken by Dr. Elias Mumuni of the University of Development Studies and Dr. Kobe Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School, with support and guidance from an advisory board whose membership included Dr. Audrey Gajepo, Mr. George Sapon, and Danama Jimanasanti. The rest are Mr. Maximus Ametogo, Madam Rebecca Ekpe, and Madam Gloria Hiaji. The study, as Dr. Asante said, has taken longer than expected, and I believe Dr. Eliasu would explain some of the challenges the research team was confronted with. Nevertheless, we are all glad that we are able to present a report today to the Ghanaian public in general and the media in particular. We hope it will enrich our understanding of how the Ghanaian media is evolving, help us to better navigate the media landscape, and contribute to the strengthening of the Ghanaian media to enable it play the role required of it towards the consolidation of our democracy. Once again, you are welcome and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Santi and Ato. So we'll have a short break for 15 minutes. We have breakfast outside, and we can start. Okay, so we'll start with the research. So we invite Dr. Ilyasu to present the research findings to us now. Let's welcome Dr. Ilyasu. But there's breakfast outside, so if you want the breakfast, you can go get something for yourself. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello, good morning to everyone. It's a privilege to stand before all of you to share some few insight on the research with the blessings of CDD Ghana that we did. Yes, so taking it from the opening remark, from the Director of Research, I think that the research was supposed to actually lasted for 6 months. However, due to several challenges, I think we will say the commissioning challenge, the field logistical challenge, and some other issues related to challenges that comes with research, especially when it has to do with booking an appointment with personalities who really do not have the time to engage with you, but you really need their input to, be included in the research process. And so at the end of the day, today we are here and so delighted to share with you some of the few insights. I would just take a little bit of cue from where Mr. Atu left. The media and the internet in Ghana. Today, Ghana is considered to be one of the most liquid, the most strong, the most versatile countries within the sub-region with very strong stakeholders when it comes to media engagement, when it comes to media plurality, when it comes to internet penetration, and when it comes to divergence of views. We really didn't just come to that state. It took a while, especially from 1995 when we decided to liberalize the environment. Today, from the National Communication Authority's website, we have over 100 active television stations. We have over active 700 radio stations functioning across the country. And like he said, though it was supposed to be an urban pro-based type of media functioning. In our case, we've been very lucky to have had both rural, peri-urban, and the urban space. And the urban space all haven't been flooded with different categories of media platforms. And so we've been very lucky. When it comes to the issues of internet penetration too, we've been very lucky. More than or close to 49% of Ghanaians have access to internet. Same as social media. So if you look at Digital 2020, the classification they did for Ghana when it comes to access to internet means that Ghana is one of the highest in the sub-region. Not just for internet use, but also for use, access and use of the social media. Within the West African belt, we are only behind Nigeria. And it is so because of the numbers. And so, if we have these metrics and statistics working so well for us, how are these numbers and positive outlook impacting on the democratic values of Ghana? How is the welfare and user satisfaction derived in using these platforms and bringing information to the doorstep of the average Ghanaian? So we looked through and realized that we needed to focus, one, on ethics and professionalism. Two, to look at how much evolution has taken place and to what benefit. Three, what are the older existing business models that we have and what are the new ones? What are the emerging threats are these metrics providing or offering us? And so in an attempt to answer these questions, several findings came. But how were we to reach out to Ghanaians to get these empirical facts? We decided to use a mixed methods approach, basically both a quantitative and a qualitative research strategy, with the quantitative being generally a survey. And being a national study, we had two options: either to deploy research assistants throughout the country to have one-on-one interview sessions, or to deploy an online platform targeting very specific professional groups and then the entire public. So we did that by reaching out to over 1,000 Ghanaians from different walks of from landscape, those from civil society, and then those who were not linked to both media and also with civil society practice. Spanning from May 25th to the end of June. And so for the online pages, that JIBA, for student journalists, for Communicators Educators Association of Ghana, and many other platforms that will allow us to gather these empirical perspectives. As an alternative, we had to put together some survey instruments to be targeting specific key informants who were senior managers and editors or chief executives and owners of media platforms. And so together, we had a complementary data set that could give us a reflection of the state of the media and internet today in Ghana. And so, in terms of a breakdown, we looked at news editors, those in administrative and management roles. We looked at those into PR and communication, reporters, broadcasters, those into freelance, and many other related jobs. And the breakdown gave us 998 with 3. And so the outline of the questions were basically basic information, and then to look at the 3 thematic themes that the study was commissioned on. And that is the evolved media environment, the business model and sustainability, and emerging threats. From the 1,001 respondents, 312 of them were females, whilst 689 were males. The interesting thing about this is that because it was not a purposive sample in reaching out to either male or females, but rather targeting various platforms, it reflects the composition of who our media practitioners are in our various setups, both radio, television, print, online, including bloggers. So we checked through, and we realized that the a priori form or assumption was that when it comes to the internet, the social media use, for example, Instagram, immediately we mention Instagram, the thought from the general public is that you should be getting more females using that platform than males. But unfortunately, you can see that we still have 58% of males more than females using that particular app. Same for Facebook, 60 against 40, and a wider margin of 79 for X, which is previously Twitter. We attempted at looking at reasons for this particular disparity. And there are several. One is cost. 2 is access. The cost dimension is basically about the ability to pay for internet, the ability to have a smart device, and then also the ability to be at a place where access to these platforms can be used. And so inclusivity in network is key, and the elements of culture. you and I know, especially when it comes to rural Ghana, for peri-urban and urban spaces, there's been that gradual move away from that definite localized assigning of gender roles and control in terms of how we use these platforms. And so we attempted at looking at what could be the reason, because when it comes to population, when it comes to the issue of population, we are practically the same. And the female group being a little bit higher than the males. I think it's supposed to be either 1% higher or 2%. I'm not very sure with that particular statistics. But for the 1001, we realized that the media is in good hands. The media is in good hands relative to training, relative to an appreciation of what media practice should be. However, the issue, yes. At the back, okay. Good. If you have over 60% of 1,000 surveyed having university diplomas and degrees, it means there is that general hope that our practitioners good. So 70% had diplomas and degrees. For us, it was significant because when you want to look at issues of ethics and professionalism, apart from learning the basic ethics in the newsroom and within the media environment, the primary source is the classroom. And to have gone through a normal university program means that actors involved in the space would have had some appreciation of what is required and their responsibilities. And so to look at the evolving media environment, first, we looked at what NCA is doing. There have been several literature we reviewed, and we realized that within the sub-Saharan African belt, Ghana seemed to have the highest number of media houses than any other African country. Why? For just a 32 million people. If we want to do population, media to population ratio, you realize that Nigeria, South Africa, probably Egypt should have been having the higher numbers like we do. But unfortunately, well, in this case, it's not unfortunately. It depends on how we use it. It depends on how we apply these numbers. So to have 152 and those being active that's 112 for television. And then also happen to have Ashanti alone having over 100. Over 100. You have Western 87, 77 for Greater Accra, and then the list being 12, Savannah region, when it comes to radio station. In April reform, we had these platforms serving as the drivers of the social media front. In particular, for Facebook and WhatsApp, we realized that the Facebook part online streaming, and then also just to now have an alternative platform to the various web pages of the television and radio platforms. Another strong platform we observed was Google. But in the case of this, it was just for information access and use, and not necessarily to publish their content. And the most, in a normal expected form, the most used we discovered was the use of the smartphone and tablet. Gradually, we are moving away from the desktop computer or laptop to the smartphone. Why the smartphone? The internet technologies are largely driven or made to suit mobile devices. So for instance, if you take the OTT technology, the over-the-top technology, you realize that it allows for various media houses, especially when it comes to radio, to go live online. Those on TV to go live online, such that you and I with our mobile devices can have access. Now, if you link the OTT to the Internet of Things, you can now have interconnected devices helping you access same content at different times or at the same time. And so, with this, it meant that we wouldn't be going forward having to use more of the fixed television systems that we have, especially when we have more of social media penetration going deeply and then the internet penetration also going higher. Once you want to access media content in that mobile form, it means that coming to sit to watch on a television will not be so much fluid compared to before. So the transitioning, because of the two technologies, the OTT and that of the Internet of Things, makes it that if you were going to be investing in fixed televisions, you should probably be having a revised thought. So if we have more authorized platforms, if we have almost half of the population on the internet and on social media, if we have the mobile device being the most used device in accessing these things, and if we have these social media platforms being highly used as opposed to the normal web page, what type of threats, what type of opportunities are these things providing to us as stakeholders? We realize that fake accounts and wrong identities, cyber stalking, cyberbullying, fake news, defamation, privacy issues were the most dominant. These were the most dominant threats posed by the evolved media environment we have today. How do we make sure that we can have very strong and viral social media platform? We can have a well-trained media practitioners. We can have government regulations and not be exposed to these challenges. This remains one of the critical questions that we will be glad to take a feedback from the audience. And so, like a key informant put, they bully, they troll, they cyberstalk, and they use surveillance to surveillance systems on people they disagree with or want to bring down. Now, you go through and you realize that some bully for passion, others bully because you probably are having a disagreement in terms of opinion. Others bully because you really came hard on either their personality or people they think are their godfathers or politically linked persons. There are several reasons why people troll or bully. At the end of the day, our expectation is that when these things happen, the state should be the final point where we can seek for support or justice. And so, a crafted media policy that can serve as a tool to check these privacy issues remains something that Ghana is yet to go through. And so if we are going through that, the question we wanted to know was that, do you then apply? Because if you apply these ethical codes by Journalists Association and all other state-led bodies, we shouldn't really be having these challenges. 80% of them said yes, and the rest were not sure and no. But why do we, with the application of the ethical standards and guides, still have to go through the normal trolls, bullying, scams, and attacks? We realize that most media platforms were interested in driving traffic, getting more followers, becoming popular. And all that. And so, whilst they are aware that most of the practices they were engaged in are not ethical, however, for the financial benefits and for positionality, most of them really will consciously do that. And for the bloggers we interviewed, some of them think that once they are not within the political and economic news space, and they are dealing with entertainment and sports, for them, it doesn't matter the type of content they bring. It shouldn't be ethical. As long as it's not about a politician or about the economy, but rather for some area that there isn't much focus. They are not so bothered about applying ethical practice. And the good thing we realized was that, started by Media Foundation for West Africa, there have been that increase of fact-checking activities by various media platforms. And so, if we evolved on internet, if we evolved on devices, if we evolved on the number of platforms, why should we still have these challenges? If people want traffic, and if they are applying the clickbait method, it means probably revenues is a challenge. So we realize that as part of the business models, subscription was one of the most thriving model most of the platforms were using. If you take subscription and paywall system, you realize that the print in particular, a lot of them have evolved online instead of the hard copy distribution level that we know. And for them to still make return on their investment, the use of subscriptions and paywalls remain an area they could rely on. And so we went through and we realized that most of these platforms are now operating based on the model of subscription. And as to whether or not people will continue to pay for the news items that we get, majority of them said yes. Now, the issue is that if Ghanaians are ready to pay for the news and media content we consume, why are we not able to move in the direction of this popular DSTV and GoTV model? We have seen the struggle of the public broadcaster for TV licensing. Are we able to push harder media content? On the monetization drive, most of the respondents indicated that they make their online earnings from YouTube, on Instagram, and then on Facebook. But they make sure that dialogic engagement online is active, is fluid. Oftentimes, it comes back to some of the ethical issues. Framing of titles, and the form of engagement, just to make sure that their specific platforms are highly interactive and that brands can associate with. In addition to the paywall monetization and that of subscriptions, we realize that the traditional revenue systems, in this case, adverts, sponsorships, and grants, there were some few media organizations who said they were making quite gains, quite a lot of gains from projects, which to us is very encouraging. We observe that the media financial stand is wobbly and weak, especially with the advent of the digital platforms controlled by the tech giants. And these giants and the likes have taken over the adverts from the media houses. So the financial sustainability is weak, which is true. What do? We realize that In an attempt to solve this financial challenge, most of these media houses have diversified. And the diversification comes in two forms. One, if they were on TV, most of them will move to radio. Or if they were just radio, they will move to TV. The challenge we observed was that some moved to construction, to the pharmaceutical sector, and many other, business areas. However, we saw it isn't that the media was generating revenues to acquire or move into that, but rather these businesses were now acquiring most of the media platforms. So, be a challenge. And so we observe manufacturing, agriculture, pharmaceutical, and others, where other business options available to these. The conclusion we came to was that we will not say we want to tame the evolutionary process when it comes to authorizations. But is it possible that the National Communication Authority can slow down and apply a very thorough system of making sure the license or authorizations gets to the in the media business, other than for things that they know will not inure to the benefit of the landscape? And so we concluded that whilst it is good to give more authorizations because it brings inclusivity and diversity, the challenge is that it ends up, on the hands of the political class. We also realize that the cross-media ownership is just one thing that really do not encourage plurality, because at the end of the day, setting the national agenda lies in the hands of a few media platforms. We realize that Ghana do not have any social media use policy. We also do not have any broadcasting law. We know the bill exists, that there have been several attempts made to pass it, but the Honorable Minister is here. I don't know whether I can use the word. The commitment to passing it is not strong enough. That as stakeholders, we think in order to sanitize the system, we really need to pass the broadcasting bill into law. In addition to that, NCA, National Media Commission, JIBA, Journalists Association, Advertisers Association, civil society, and the Ministry of Information have to have this revolving framework that do not exert a censorship control, but the issue of the threat will continue to derail the impact and progress made by the media. And that is one key recommendation we made. On the issue of the privacy, the troll, and the bullying, the framework must actually be central to making sure that both the perpetrator and the victims will have an easy access to this particular guideline or support that will be developed. The authorization regime has to be reduced drastically. Not that they have to withdraw all issued authorizations or licenses. But then they have to probably stay put and make sure that the rates at which these things are issued is reduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eliasu. So we'll go straight to the panel discussion and follow with the open session. So to introduce our moderator for today's panel discussion, our moderator is an assistant news editor and co-host of Joy FM Super Morning Show. She started off as a radio and TV presenter and is now a newly qualified lawyer, currently serving as a people lawyer at the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Justice. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mama V from Joy FM.
Thank you very much. A very good morning to all of you. I think this is our former meeting for most of us, so a happy new year, considering we're still fresh in 2024. Congratulations to CDD and partners for this report. Our job here for the next 20 minutes, at least with my panelists, would be to give feedback, validate, and then recommendations. And then there will be an opportunity for all of you to also give feedback to the researchers. So straight away, I want to introduce the panelists. But before that, I would like to acknowledge we have a Deputy AG here. Good morning, sir. Thank you for coming. And then the Member of Parliament for Nigo Pram, Mr. Sam George. Thank you. Also ranking on the Communications Committee of Parliament. So let's straight away get into introduction. Start with our Information Minister and Member of Parliament for the Ofuase Ayerebi constituency. Before his political career, the Honorable Paul Nkrumah was a prominent, which I proudly co-host today. Please help me welcome, with a round of applause, the Information Minister. We also do have Dr. Theodora Dame-Adjei Tetteh. She's a lecturer at the Department of Communication Studies, University of Ghana, Journalism and Media Studies, Rhodes University, South Africa. And she's particularly interested in studies on media effect and impact, audience response, climate change, communication, emerging media usage, and appropriation and media sustainability. Please help me welcome with a round of applause, Dr. Theodora Dame-Adjei Tetteh. Okay, she's joining us online. Okay, so can we just get a connection? Can I say hello, and can you please say hello back? Dr. Adjei Tetteh, if you can unmute, maybe.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. I hope you're well.
Yes, I think I have unmuted. Yes, I am good. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, too. Thank you for joining us. And then our last member to join the panel is, he actually has, with a career spanning over 15 years in middle to executive management, Mr. Nneoma Fameye Eshen has emerged as a dynamic and accomplished figure in the realm of administration, marketing, and media management. His early exposure actually laid the foundation for his expertise in media and broadcast management, shaping his path towards a successful and influential career. His impact on the media landscape was marked by the establishment of Love FM in Kumasi and Adom FM in Accra, all parts of the multimedia group. In both instances, Ms. Anyama's leadership was characterized by an innate ability to achieve and surpass ambitious audience and revenue target within just 2 years. Well, he's moved on since. He actually went to the Kenner Group, and most recently he has assumed the role of Group Chief Operations Officer at Media General, where his responsibilities encompass business development, advertisement, and the oversight of new projects. Please, let's put our hands together. Let's welcome the Chief Operating Officer of Media General. Thank you, sir. All right, so I think straight away, because there was a last bit about the famous broadcasting bill. Honorable Minister, I think I want to start from there. What's the update?
So, Mama V, Mr. Fami, and everybody here, good morning to you. The latest update, just yesterday I received correspondence from the Attorney General on the 2024 redrafted version of the broadcasting bill, and still some issues that have been raised for our consideration for us to respond to, and we'll be responding to those issues. The reason for which there's been a delay in laying it before Parliament is not for want of a political will. I think we've demonstrated enough when it comes to laws to deal with free expression, etc. We're very committed. The RTI Act and its implementation story so far is an example. But the reason is that the last draft has been overtaken by several events because our industry is a fluidly growing industry. For example, the last draft defined broadcasting only to refer to television. And I think as was presented in the report, today you have OTT, you have all other forms of technology-led broadcasting. There are a number of other issues that also overtook the last draft, issues of responsibility for moderating content. So if you're on radio and television, broadcasting applies to you, and you are responsible for moderating the content that comes out. How about if you move that content onto your Facebook page, and somebody goes under those posts to make comments which you would not allow on radio or television, be they defamatory or ethnic inciting? Do the same rules apply? Should they apply? So there have been several issues that have overtaken the initial draft, issues that we've thankfully worked with a lot of the stakeholders on to get a certain common position. What is the responsibility of the international or the global social media platforms when it comes to ensuring that some sort of content which ordinarily you would not allow here on radio or television in Ghana is being posted on their platforms? Do they bear liability, or should the media house that is operating that particular platform bear liability? So there are quite a number of issues. We've been able to deal with, let's say, about 80% of them. The AG just wrote to us yesterday raising some more issues that we need to respond to, and we're hoping that with the stakeholders we can tidy it up and take it before Parliament shortly.
Any timelines?
I won't rush to put out timelines now. It's important that we get everybody or the key stakeholders to align on the...
Unless there's a... Okay, all right. And let's join Dr. Jean Tetteh. I want to ask if there are emerging social media trends beyond the presentation, what we've heard, that we need to pay attention to.
Maybe is the question to me? I lost you a bit at the beginning. I can't hear. Yeah, okay, okay, I can now hear you. Could you repeat your question, please? Well, I think that the report actually speaks to what the emerging trends are. And I must say that, okay, so I think I have to say that this is a very good report, and it reflects the report that we also put together, the State of the Ghanaian Media report. and other research that I've been involved in the past 2 to 3 years. And for a researcher, I think that's the question of consistency and reliability of research findings and data and so on means it is very important to us. So this particular research actually corroborates a lot of the things that we have also found on the field. The trends, as I indicated earlier, it's reflected in the report. But the question of I think I particularly became interested in the question of more males accessing the social media platforms than females. And I stretched it to the ownership, and even in the newsroom situations where we have, in fact, there is a report I read somewhere that says that a lot of females are leaving journalism schools, but when you go into the newsrooms, there are fewer of them. So then the question of why there aren't that many females in the newsrooms and the ability to hold management positions or decision-making positions in newsrooms and the rest is something that we need to give attention to. Then there was also this particular finding about skilled labor force, the skilled labor force that we have. And I also straight the argument to the fact that when it comes to females, they also have a number of challenges. And I'm sure we know the reasons because several verification bits where media industries or media outlets own other, businesses. I think that in our State of the Ghanaian Media report, we found out that the pharmaceutical sector particularly is a major income, driver of revenue for a lot when it comes to the traditional ways of generating revenue, particularly when you go to the rural areas. There are a lot of these herbal products being advertised, sponsoring programs, in the media and all of that. But we also see that these particularly the bigger ones, like the bigger ones, no name comes to mind readily, but these people were not into the business of media. They were a source of revenue for mainstream media. But unfortunately, they've also decided to venture into media, business. And so they are taking that revenue that they were giving to media outlets to, get them, remain sustainable. They are bringing it back to them. So you would hardly, for example, see that Special Ice or the cocoa powder, that cocoa drink, being advertised on other platforms apart from the Despite Media platform. So these are some of the things. I don't know whether I could go on or I should just pause for now.
Especially from where Dr. Agyenh Tetteh left Mr. Nyeoma, are we more vulnerable than before with this business model of sustainability?
If you refer to the business model of private businesses going into the media, as in businesses that originally were not in the media, then I think there are pros and cons to it. For example, Doctor alludes to a particular business that has interest in other things, advertising on their own media stations. I see nothing wrong with that. Business should be run as a business. If I am in manufacturing and I realize that a significant chunk of my operating expenses go into media, I may do an analysis to see how profitable it would be for me if I owned my own media. But whether or not I'll be successful becomes a completely different conversation. Making a business success of the media is not for the absent, it's not for the faint-hearted, and it's not for the untrained. So this particular media company she references may be an outlier. Maybe it's because they know what they are doing and they are doing it right. Because I saw in the report references to companies owning media and owning other things. Many of them end up making profits from the businesses and using that to subvent their media operations. A lot of those 700 plus media businesses you see are actually not profit making as we speak. And so the fact that you decide that I have a manufacturing company, let me buy it, radio license, and I'll only advertise there, does not mean you necessarily make a success. In fact, in more cases than not, you will probably end up losing both businesses.
Right. So you've addressed the business side. Can we talk about the democratic consolidation? I mean, what does this do to our democracy?
What does what do?
In terms of owners of media organizations getting into other businesses?
As long as they operate professionally, I don't see a problem. You see, a business, like I said, has to be run like a business. All businesses have aims, objectives. Yes, you intend to make money, but in the media, you also have a social responsibility part to it. You are offering a service that is unlike any other. And so to be good at it, you need to do it properly. Issues about credibility, issues about honesty, issues about training are all very important. But also very important is the structure you build, because many of them may not be able to do what it takes to meet the standards that you espouse to.
Right. So I want to quickly just take your views, because I on the report, in terms of the policy perspective on this report that we've just, heard details of.
I mean, I think first, maybe if I may just, tee off from where Mr. Famia spoke about, there are three things that come in there. Number one, not everybody owns media for business purposes. So I think the whole supposition that everybody is owning media for business and therefore profitability, etc., is one that should be examined. Number two, when you come to the question of democracy, two sub-issues come up. A is equal opportunity for other democratic actors to have their voice heard on that particular media platform. State-owned media must do when it comes to ensuring that its media platforms afford all actors equal opportunity. But does the same apply to private media actors? I'm not too sure. And then, even on the question of democracy, what sort of narratives are being churned out on these media platforms? Because narratives are not illegal, per se. Half empty glass or half full glass are, two different narratives, but they are not illegal in themselves. But they go to affect democracy and the deepening of democracy. And then you have the question of ethics. When people are being unethical or are going contrary to the laws, then you have a responsibility to have the regulators come in. But specific to the recommendations that have been outlined here, I think it's clear that the extensive liberalization of our media ecosystem today has led to a situation where the overwhelming majority of media houses are not commercially viable. And I'm saying that bearing in mind the fact that not everybody owns it for commercially viable purposes.
Yeah, so just on that, if not for business, then for what?
Oh, if you look at today the satellite TV platforms that are charging about $6,000 a month, which translated into CDs is what? 70-something thousand CDs a month just for transmission cost. And if you look on your P&L and on the expenditure side, you have about 14 different cost centers, and one alone is about 70-something thousand. You haven't dealt with staff cost. You haven't dealt with, other OPEX items. The only people, or a good chunk of the people who can afford that, are churches who do, tithe of, whatever, or come and sow a seed or something, and then they quickly can afford it. So when you go on a lot of these satellite platforms, you find out that they are dominated by churches. But businesses that are having to go through all of those other income and expenditure items struggle to be there. They don't need to own it for business purposes or for commercial purposes. They are doing it for, getting the word out there for whatever reason that they are in. So I'm saying that I agree with the first point that the extensive liberalization has led to a scenario where the majority of these media houses are not commercially viable. 700 plus radio stations only, about 200 plus television stations, a good number of them are not commercially viable. It will require a certain level of consolidation before you can get some more commercial viability in this space. Now, that consolidation may come through one of two options. You may require some regulatory consolidation, which I am not sure is the way we want to go as a country. You may require some market consolidation. Space now find reason to do mergers and acquisitions and syndications, because if 5 of you are making losses and it's easier for you to come together and reduce costs and break even, it may be a more viable route to go than all 5 of you still owning a brand and you are chief executive making losses and I'm chief executive making losses and he's chief executive making losses. So that's the first part that I agree with the findings here. The second, I think, is a point that was made by Doc when he was doing his presentation, that it's very easy to be deceived today. Because you see, media is still a public asset entrusted in the hands of some persons to operate on behalf of the public. Editors and editorial boards, so that even what you call the opinion is an opinion that has been fettered by the views of other, professionals in there. Was a very different era from today, where on the average, if I have my radio station somewhere at the back there and I'm sitting on and I'm expressing my opinion, that opinion may be educated, not educated, factual, not. You cure this extensive spread of opinions that may not necessarily be grounded. I think a lot more training and support for media houses is the way to go, not necessarily clamping down on that. And from the government side, what we've done is to work with the stakeholders to introduce the Media Capacity Enhancement Program, which allows the faculty themselves, who are the ones responsible for training, to provide some more training to those who are practicing media, so that some of those high standards that we're all complaining are dwindling can now be brought in some more. Those are some of the key areas that I agree with the research piece on.
All right, so just real quick, can I take you back to the broadcasting bill? Would it take care of regulations related to social media?
Well, that's a very interesting question that you ask. In terms of social media regulations, the closest we are coming to in the current draft has to deal with the responsibility for moderation. I mean, first of all, you can't regulate what somebody wants to publish. The Constitution is quite clear on our rights to free expression. So whether it's on traditional media or new media, he has a right to publish whatever he wants to publish. However, if it infringes on, let's say, the Criminal Offences Act or other pieces of legislation, or the Electronic Communications Act or something else, then he will bear the consequences for that. Or if it's defamatory, he will bear the consequences. But now, the new arena or the new theater that we have to deal with is how do you moderate comments or commentary or content that is brought in by other persons? Because you are still the one primarily responsible for broadcasting this. Our view is that the media house must bear responsibility for moderating the conduct. Because if you were on television, Mama V, you wouldn't say something. I know you, I know your standard. You wouldn't say something. And if somebody on your show said it, you as a professional journalist will quickly moderate it. But if you put that on your Facebook page, and he goes there to say the same thing, ought you be excused for not moderating that? We're of the view that once you are going to open up that window for people to have that conversation, that same responsibility applies, and you must put somebody there to keep an eye on it and to moderate it. But our view will be subjected to a debate of about 275 members of parliament. Yeah, about 275 members of parliament and other people. And in the end, where the industry and the country believes we should go is where we're going to go. But on the matter of social media regulation, the closest you will find in the current draft is a proposal that media houses or publishers or broadcasters who put out content should take responsibility for moderating that content. Else, the same laws of defamation or maybe sometimes criminal conduct that may have applied on mainstream media ought to apply to you. That's the closest that you come.
So how about posts, comments? These may be faceless people who are commenting as the program is running.
It's all broadcasting. If you opened or if you activated your phone lines and somebody came onto your airwaves and, I mean, I'm just using this as an example, said that the Bank of Ghana is on fire, go and do this there. And you would have a responsibility to moderate that in a particular way. Why shouldn't that apply on new media platforms? It should apply. That is our view. That's our proposal, but we'll subject it to the views there. The final point, and then I would let go, is that also in the draft of the broadcasting bill, one of the questions that was not previously answered, i.e., what is the responsibility of the National Media Commission when it comes to electronic frequency authorization? And what should be the responsibility of the National Communication Authority? We've managed to cure that in the current draft, where now the National Media Commission in this draft will have a prior obligation to assist you with your notice of content, which used to be in the original applications going to NCA, but they had no business doing that. Now that job will be given to the National Media Commission, and then they will now aid you to get your notice of content to the National Communication Authority, and the NCA will focus purely on the electronic spectrum side of it. So in terms of regulation, that's how this new draft is seeking to address some of these issues.
Right. Ms. Nyama, real quick, your follow-up.
No, just a quick question I wanted to ask you for maybe just clarity. Talking about the social media space, a lot of these platforms are not exactly companies. They are just human beings. It's one single person running a show. And how do we intend to make it easy to bring people like that to book?
Well, thankfully, it's not too difficult to identify persons who are using particular social media handles, if the regulators are minded to identify. We've had several instances where people have posted stuff on their handles that were of a criminal nature, etc. And when the authorities thought to find out who those persons were, they were able to go through the appropriate channels and identify who the user of this handle. In fact, currently there's a case in court, AG is here, where a couple of persons are on trial for publishing false news with I think, intent to cause fear and panic associated with our currency. You remember about a year and a half ago, people were just putting stuff on social media, and I think there are a couple of people on trial currently. It wasn't too difficult. A corporate entity or an individual. People must understand that you have a responsibility for what you publish. You don't just put it out there and say, you know, I heard it, so I've also put it out. Aha. And if it infringes, you have a right to free expression. But if it infringes on the criminal laws or it's defamatory, you have questions to answer.
Dr. Ajin-Tetteh, I wonder what your thoughts are on this sort of ethical social media regulation.
All right. So I remember when we published the State of the Ghanaian Media reports, we also had some follow-up engagements with relevant stakeholders. And I remember clearly engaging with GIBA, and some of the members expressed the view that there should be a separate social media, a regulation or a regulatory framework for social media. And I think that this particular report that we are launching today also speaks to that there was a general consensus that there should be that kind of framework for regulating things that happen on the social media space. But I am always for media and information literacy too, because I believe that when people know how to use digital technologies in an ethical way, then we can stem some of these things. So people should be exposed to how they can fact check information. So that's the ordinary audience should be able to know how to fact check information. They should be able to do all kinds of things that would prevent them from, all kinds of the effects of misinformation and all of that. And the basic is that if you are not sure of the authenticity of the information or news, don't share. So if people become sensitized in that way, I think it's very useful. And I also believe that academic institutions have an opportunity, because in the report, we see that a lot of media workers are going for higher education. So we should be able to incorporate that in curricula so that students get out of the classroom and they're already well armed. We see a lot of media development organizations do that. I think it is good. We, in the Department of Communication Studies, we've been involved in media and information literacy trainings for JHS students. We've also done quite a number in collaboration with Media Foundation for West Africa and the UNESCO and so on. We've been able to do some fact-checking training for journalists. I think journalists need that. And fact-checking is an area that does not necessarily attract a lot of revenue or organization. So a lot of investment is not put there. I think that news organizations or media organizations should put money in fact-checking. There should be fact-checking desks in every news organization, and there should be, innovative ways of telling fact-check stories. We usually would have it in print formats. Recently, I saw, to my, utter amazement, that Media Foundation for West Africa had started something which is audiovisual in nature, and they were using the Twi language. I think we should be very innovative about some of these things. So when there are major issues that need to be debunked, then we have them in different formats shared on WhatsApp, which has a lot of misinformation spread there and so on. So I would go for media information literacy, fact-checking, and then making, fact-checked information accessible to all.
Oh, I think we're having some breaks in your connection. Please, are you?
Yes, I am. Hello, Mama B. Yes. But if I may, I think that recently I have seen that there are some good attempts at self-regulation. We've seen in the report, I saw something to do with Blogging Ghana, which is an association of bloggers coming together to try to find a way of doing things, in an ethical manner and the rest. But recently, I also saw in the news that there's a new media association of Ghana, where I think the Ministry of Information, the Deputy Minister was even there at the launch. And think and when I read further, I went to do further research, they say that they are made up of bloggers, content creators, social media influencers, and so on. And they are looking forward to having a shared, commitment to upholding journalistic integrity. So these are also very good initiatives. And I believe that if these bloggers, because they are the major source of people, they would be ethical in what they do, then it would help as well. Thank you.
Just before we wrap up, because we're done with our 20 minutes, and I promised myself I'll stick to the time. Ms. Nyama, in terms of the findings and the recommendations, I want you to combine. Do they correspond with your observations and your experiences? Because you have lots of experiences.
Hello? Yeah, it's working now. Yes, a lot of what I have read so far, it hasn't been too long, kind of validates what we have always known and believed. And so that is good. It's the recommendations are also very useful for practitioners like ourselves. And so yes, in the main, we are pleased that a document like this has been put together. It would need some further work, obviously, and as time progresses, we may need updates to this same survey or research.
There was a bit about the media's financial sustainability and the effect on welfare of workers, which I am sure, because of the University of Ghana's Communication Studies report last year, would not be shocking to as it was, because Professor Gajaput said she was shocked by some of the salaries that workers take. Yeah. So in terms of just that bit, because you're a practitioner, I'm not putting you on the spot.
Oh, that's fine.
Just your comments on that bit.
Yes, my comments are is like any other industry. The serious and professional people pay serious and professional money. The ones who are doing it as a hobby and as vanity projects, if you decide to work in those places, you can't expect to be paid too much. And then there's a huge gap in between where some pay fairly and some don't. But most importantly for me, I think that the professionals themselves, whether you're a professional journalist, producer, director, cinematographer, or videographer, the better you are, the more likely you are to work for a professional organization that will pay you well.
Right.
And I'm happy and lucky to say that I probably work for if not the best, one of the very best payers.
So it means that because in the report somewhere there is the bit about the media's financial sustainability being shaky. Yours is obviously not shaking right now.
Oh, it is not a simple and easy business. I would never say that. And I remember I told you it's not for the faint-hearted or the absent. It is serious business that has to be run professionally. If you do it right, you should be okay. You see, there is a correlation between the content you produce, the ratings you get, and your revenue earning capacity. There's a direct correlation between the content you churn out, the ratings you will get or the audiences you will get, and your revenue earning capacity.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I would like to say...
Mama Viva, I just
yes,
interrupt you. While I agree with him, there's, however, the other side of it, that if the EPL had 60 teams playing in the English Premier League, it will be difficult for them to pay the kind of salaries they pay. It will be difficult for them to hold the standards that they hold. So there's something also to be said about the market size, yes, that we have now. And yes, the ratio. And at some point...
Pie itself is small.
Yeah, the pie itself is small. If you look at the advertising industry in Ghana, it is small. And for 700 radio stations to be operating in this market and over 200 television stations, as great as some may be, the majority has down the most. Was not so much the attacks on journalists, which tackled at some point down the line.
Thank you very much. I think I would give, just to be fair, the very last thoughts. If you have any final thoughts that you want to share in about a minute. Do we still have her online? Okay, maybe not. So in the absence of that, I want to say thank you very much. Mr. Nyama, thank you. Thank you, Information Minister Kojo Nkrumah. Thanks to you all. Now we have the open forum. But largely, we want to direct the questions to the researchers of the project. So if you have any questions based on the overview of the report that was shared, but also on this conversation, I will not limit you. Please, you can put your hands up, and then we'll get a microphone to you so you can share your feedback. Oh, yes, please. You can clap for them. Thank you. You can please take your seats. Yes. So now it's over to all of us. Yes, ma'am. Prof's hands.
Hello.
Thank you very much. I want to congratulate the presenter and the richness of the report, as well as the rich engagement we've just heard from the panelists. And I wanted to pick up from what Honorable Kojo Nkrumah said, because I think it strikes at the heart of media sustainability as well as media governance, is the implications, as he noted, of the oversaturation of the media space. And I wanted to then turn it over. I know that the minister shared his views on how that could be addressed, but I wondered if the researcher had agreed with that suggestion, so he has alternate ways of alternate perspectives on how media could be better sustained and governance. And the reason the issue is important in terms of governance is that when you have media that are not doing well because the space is very crowded, then they are tempted to cut corners. And that has implications for content. In order to thrive, they have to sensationalize. They may not be paying their electricity bills and find legal connections, etc., etc. There are all kinds of governance issues that are implied in that.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I think it is well captured in our report that the saturation is actually not helping the revenue drive of the media platforms here in Ghana. One other observation we made is the lack of interest for the business community to advertise. So, for instance, here in Accra, if you go to Abosu or Kain, who are into the auto industry, how many of them are ready to come out to partner with the media when it comes to traditional adverts? We are not actually used to that, but when it comes to the local economy, there are those that we have. You get to some markets and you are told by some local business people that they don't want their businesses to be known. They don't want their businesses to be spoken to or, discussed on the media space. Yet, the media will need them as partners to advertise their services or products and also make money. So it becomes a little bit difficult. Nonetheless, for us, once you have saturation and with very specific number of stakeholders who are supposed to bring in the revenue, it becomes very difficult for them to make returns on their investment. We realize that almost all the media platforms are relying on government for adverts. And that is a challenge. And again, because the private sector is not as robust as it should be. And if that happens, traditional advertising system becomes very difficult. And that is where the subscription, the paywall systems are not much. When I say are not much, sometimes the monetization model or formula differs. And if you happen to have a number of your interactive followers or Dialogic, members coming from different geographic location other than our local, area here, it raises or increases your earning compared to almost every other person being in Accra, Kumasi, Takoradi, or Tamale. In that case, whilst your pages are getting highly interactive and dialogical, the amount of money you earned on that monetized drive are quite low compared to if it is open to the global level.
Right.
And so it is another thing that we really have to look. But for us, we recommend that we are encouraging I'm just trying to be choosy with my words, but we are encouraging that the over 700 and over 200 platforms that we have, going forward, we really have to relook at it. And I'm very happy with the suggestion of the Honorable Minister that for instance, you pick the religious organizations in media. They may not necessarily, have these platforms to make revenue. But we realize, and just to add up as a factor, that most of these media platforms who pays their staff 400 cedis a month, sometimes they owe them in arrears of 7 months. How do you owe someone 7 months and you expect the person to still come to work, to report, and be ethically balanced, and not be corrupt, and it is practically impossible. Nonetheless, that is the reality on ground. And so, no matter the market mix, we should get to a point where we say we have an average standardized pay, base pay for all media practitioners, such that if you happen to be in the most strongest ones, at least you will be lucky to have higher, salary. But then we should have a benchmark. Instead of paying someone who is a diploma or a university graduate 400 cedis a month, and the person is owed arrears, it becomes a problem.
Right. Well, we want to take some thoughts also from another team member who's joining online, Dr. Kobe Mensah. Please share your thoughts with us. Oh, kindly unmute, Dr. Mensah.
The dots of it. In as much as it's a business, of course, a certain catch-22 would be facing the country, whether you really restrict, that particular antitrust competition, because it's an antitrust. You have someone controlling the minds, one media house, literally controlling the minds of the people. So they produce a product, perhaps unwholesome. I'm not saying that they're doing that, but perhaps maybe somebody produce a product of a substandard and the person has a media house to promote it. I mean, it has a lot of implication in terms of its impact on consumers. So in as much as the country needs employment, of course, we talk about unemployment and the issue that you wouldn't want to ordinarily restrict people from creating businesses. You want to look at it from the perspective of antitrust, in terms of competition. And don't forget, the report actually shows that two groups of people, politicians and businesses, are owning the space, which means that, and unfortunately, our political system is not able to measure or control who is funding who in terms of political power. So you're going to have a cyclical, a situation where the money that's actually being generated from the business, because the person owns a radio station or a TV station, is actually passed on to the political class. So one of the political classes is going to get a lot of resources depending on which business owner is actually backing it. And that's why we're having quite a number of our other political parties not able to stand the competition within the political system. So we need to connect the dot as opposed to looking at it from one side. Yes, it's good to have a business. It's good to actually own a business and promote it. But the state needs to look at the issue of antitrust competition and look at its impact on the democracy and governance of the media space. And that's the point I wanted to make. Thank you. That's the ideal, but we've seen on your own platform, Joy, that media houses had gone on to promote, so to speak, substandard product without a check. It's possible. It probably may not be a substandard product, but the communication, people had been exaggerating the wholesomeness or the efficacy of products, especially drugs, for example. And you articulated a point. I think along the line, we articulated a point of, and even Theodora actually said it, about pharmaceutical businesses owning, media houses. Efficacy of products perhaps could be exaggerated, for example. So yes, we know that there are institutions that are supposed to handle certain issues or certain areas that wouldn't be the responsibility of the media house. But the point we're making is, if someone owns a media house and owns a business, it's far easier to sort of promote things that may not be to the advantage of the populace and may not be to the advantage of media sustainability, for example. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So the question of sustainability, when we talk about sustainability, I think we are very passionate about it because we want quality journalism. So we don't just want media houses to be in existence, but I think Ato mentioned something like some of the news organizations producing foreign or showing foreign junk to audiences. We want quality journalism, investigative journalism, stories from rural areas and the rest, and we need money to do that. And so I wrote down a number of things that I think could help inform solutions when it comes to media viability. And one of them is possibly, if it is possible, I know that the government is doing a lot when it comes to through their media. There was a project recently that was launched somewhere at GIJ or so, and it talks about, I think, training for journalists and so on and so forth. If we could, yes, media capacity enhancement program, I think is very good. But could we also consider a media development fund with clear-cut criteria on who can access what kinds of content or production that particular fund can go into, helping produce such content and so on. And I talk about this in relation to what is existent in South Africa, the Media Diversity Development Agency, that provides funding for particularly community media outlets. I think community media is so crucial in our media space that we can't let them just be and sort of hustle to survive. So if there could be some funding for them, so maybe some more discussions would have to go on around that. I know that in certain countries, they are talking about tax reliefs and so on. Could these come up for discussion in our context as well? I know in Colombia, there is tax relief on advertising for media outlets. There's tax reliefs in Tunisia, Indonesia, and so on credits for outlets that hire new journalists, for example. And it's a way of relieving media houses of the burden. There are tax reliefs for credits for subscribers, the need to go for the subscription model. But I think, and I'm happy that there in the report, we see that people are ready to pay. But how much? What kinds of content? Maybe a lot of deliberation that has to be done in that regard. But if we could consider credits for new subscribers, so that it incentivizes them to subscribe to these media outlets and their content. And then maybe I think a thorough discussion needs to be had around some of these things. Thank you very much.
For this development fund?
So these are things that we need to discuss. I think I was in one session somewhere, and the question of independence of who is going to be in charge of, the fund is very important. And I don't think it will take this particular forum to be able to determine. Yeah,
I appreciate it. And then the source of that fund as well. Oh, I was
Funding,
dying to hear from you. If you had not raised your hand, I would have brought the microphone to you. Please, can we take a microphone to Mr. Sub-George?
Thank you very much. And I think that I just want to go back to the issue of the saturation of our media space. And I just want to, because eventually this will come to Parliament and we'll have a conversation. But I think that policy must be driven by what research is showing. I wanted to find out if your research had any direction relative to how we can reduce the number of radio stations. Yes, we have over 700 authorizations, but you have about 546 that are operational at this point in time. The question like Honorable Kojo raised, was using the analogy of the EPL. It's very relevant. How do we, and even though he gave two pathways and quickly ran away from the very first one, I wanted to ask that, as researchers, what do you think if we were setting the Bank of Ghana, and I'll use the Bank of Ghana as an example. Banking is also a licensed space like media. But when the Bank of Ghana wants to ensure sanity in that space, it can raise the minimum requirements. That in itself is a policy decision. The Bank of Ghana has not come after any bank, but what that forces certain banks to do is to then merge and have acquisitions to be able to meet the minimum requirements. As researchers, do you think that you would advise policymakers to setting new minimum requirements for the running and operation of media houses? Because you go to other jurisdictions and you see what a media house is, with the number of reporters and the kind of infrastructure in place. And you come to Ghana and a media house is smaller than the kitchen in some people's homes, and all pass as media houses. Do you think that we should, by policy, set a certain benchmark that will automatically force the merger and acquisitions of media houses? And again, I heard the talk about syndication. What is the effect of syndication on revenues and advertising revenues? Because if I put an advert on one media house that was syndicated across 24 different stations, and I get repeat advertisement on those other 24 media house stations, but I paid for only one, what happens to the owners of those other 23 stations that are syndicated, because many of them don't have the ability to cut their feed every time it goes to adverts. And so you're paying for just one media house advert, and you're getting your ad spot repeated across the country. So what's the effect of syndication? And then even when you look at the NCA licensing regime, they're actually, you can't broadcast beyond a certain radius. There's a reason why that was put when the NCA was set up in terms of the licensing regime. Now, when you do syndication, you actually abuse the whole idea of a certain radius of broadcasting. So how do we look at all of this in the light of syndication? And like I said, the first question on policy and a minimum requirement. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Mamabi, can I take those questions?
Since you've handed me the microphone, Honorable, I'll take the chance to make a quick comment, and it's a correction. The Constitution is clear that you cannot license media. So that analogy between licensing of the banks and licensing of media cannot hold, simply because the Constitution is categorical. And that's why even in the language of who gets media, radio broadcast, we use authorization. And that is why also the digital space has escaped regulation, because you do not need recourse to anybody to operate media. And the rest of your question, I shall turn over to the...
All right.
Thank you.
Mamabi, can I answer the question?
Just to build from where Prof stopped. So the question we asked when we realized that, I think there was a study in Nigeria talking about the authorizations. And even with their numbers being very low, there were some other actors who complained that the number of platforms, were getting out of hand. But we really do not probably belong to the group that says that let's reduce the numbers who are already, having the authorizations. If you glean through, you realize that the over 700 is geographically balanced. You go to most communities and the authorization has given enough space to very marginal ethnic groups who, if not because of the very local radio station they will have, they will never hear their own language, being spoken on television or on radio. And so sometimes that dimension of inclusivity and taking care of the marginal, smaller ethnic group remains very key, such that even if we are to develop a model, that should be one key thing, that should drive it. The second thing is that we think even if, like as part of our recommendation, even if we should reduce the numbers, it should be done organically. And that organic reduction will be for the market to determine. We'll leave it to the market to sieve itself. When we say to sieve itself, for example, there were many journalists we asked, do you have your Senate paid? One of them asked me, you said Senate, what is Senate? More or less to say that the 400, 500 is not being paid, let alone asking for his or her pension. And that is just how much serious these things can be. So that if it happens that in 3-4 months, 5, 4, 6 journalists you would have been engaging will leave, if the attrition rate gets higher and higher by day, no one will tell you to close down your station. And so in that organic form, if we have that welfare package designed in such a way that Senate will come after you, GRA will come after you, without you doing those due diligence, you won't be able to operate that going concern model that every other business should operate on. And so in that case, mergers comes in. Those who are able to manage the space and make sure the welfare systems designed for the practitioners are offered them, it will come at hand. And then the weaker ones will go out. However, we as stakeholders in the universities and then that of government should be interested in supporting the very media platforms who are in the rural areas. There should be those that we should be targeting and supporting. Sometimes for utilities, they are not able to even pay. Yet the content they generate are so critical to the development of the community they belong to. And so how do we then support them to continue to support and then share more light on the darker moments of various communities and bring development, and then support their staff who really may not be getting enough? And so the media literacy thing that Doc mentioned is one key thing. And then the projects, because most of the better or stronger media platforms explain that they get most of these other supported revenue from the project, the courses. So are we able as a media house to look for a call, a project, a fellowship, put a proposal together, and then apply for, so that the operational costs, the overheads and other things by our station can be catered for whilst we bring development to the doorstep of our constituents or catchment? Is it possible? If we are not able to look into these directions and to just say, okay, let's develop a policy to put maybe a higher authorization fee, then it means that we are now just going back to those who can afford. But media management and content creation should not be for those who really can afford. And then the other issue of the syndication. The syndication bit, we realized that I tried monitoring. So for instance, there are some stations we visited in Upper East. They were just waiting for 12 to pick from Joy and then pick from City. So, and I asked, so what about your local news? What happened? Those ones like in Garu, in Navrongo, the local news that the people will, you are waiting for Joy and City from Accra. But then, if it happens, it is only just the news, but not with adverts. And so the syndication goes with the content relay, and not necessarily the relay of paid adverts that the local and other referred platforms will allow on their platforms. I don't know of the OTT, over-the-top technology bits in terms of syndication. Because, for instance, I observe from Newsfile, if they upload the 2 hours or 3 hours of their content on YouTube, it goes with the adverts. And so if it is that you are to now pay just for the TV, what about the advert that is now captured online that is consistently being played? I don't know. So in as much as the content remains online and played for that number of times, what then happens? So that is the dimension I think the syndication element can come. But I know the media practitioners would have taken that model into consideration when charging for these advertising costs. And so from policy direction, I think creating that environment to make sure quality, ethical and professional standards are met, and then also making sure that the privileged communities are well represented and some fund or development support are offered to them. For those of us in the urban spaces, we let the market forces determine, and then the weaker ones will have a place to.
Okay, so there's a follow-up.
No, just a quick clarity on the issue. I respect, I mean, and we've used licenses and authorizations interchangeably when it comes to the media, and I respect the constitutional provisions. But even if I heard you speaking, in your answer, what you referenced, for example, are some of the kinds of, I'm not saying that we should create a fetter, but even today, there's an unfettered right to communication and dissemination of information. And that's what I'm saying, that when you look at the terms and conditions of the authorizations, can you do something about that? Because you have an authorization today, And in 5 years' time, when you're supposed to go for a renewal of that authorization, the NTA can refuse you because you have breached some of the terms of that authorization. So it is that I am asking, that the ability for everybody, it's like we've set the bar so low that almost everybody can get an authorization, even though the spectrum is a finite national resource. And that's what I'm saying, that do we want to look at the terms of the authorization and raise that bar a bit, such that it is not everybody? Because right now what you've done is you've created a secondary black market, or a black market of sorts, where every day people are calling you and saying, I have a frequency in Accra, I'm selling for $1 million. I have a frequency in Kumasi, I'm selling for 500,000. Even the terms of the frequency or the authorization says you can't transfer without the permission of the NTA. But that happens several times without the NTA applying it. If we say we want to sit and wait for this to happen organically, for 30 years, have we seen any organic shift? Is it another 30 years we're going to wait? So I'm saying that let's look at the terms of the authorization and see what we can do there, such that it is not so, the bar is not dropped so low. Now, on the issue of media houses that serve marginalized groups, I believe that that's why the framework allows for community radios. You can't go for a commercial radio license and expect that the state must subvent you, or that you must get some benefit from a fund that is taxpayer related. Go for a community radio license and use that to serve marginalized groups and propagate local language content. But the question we must even ask ourselves is, today, like you rightly pointed out, many of those who even have community radio licenses basically do not do a lot of news work, which is the basis for community radio licenses. They sit back and just relay the information from Accra and major stations in Kumasi. So let's encourage those groups to go in for community licenses, and let's clearly look at how commercial licenses have been given and how that's creating a secondary market that people are just trading in. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eliasu. Before you come in, first I want to go online quickly and get a team member comments, and then I'll come to the information minister before I come to you. So online.
Yeah, thank you, Mavi. I think that I wanted to add to what my colleague Eliasu actually said, and on the back of Honorable Sam George's point. I think that from the syndication perspective, what we realized was that, and I suppose perhaps Eliasu actually, it escaped him. There is also not only the news relay, but there are some areas that also actually relay the morning shows. All right, and the morning shows, we have these LPMs that they do, which is the live presenter mention, etc. Now the point is that if you do that, and of course, as Honorable Sam George said, you have actually charged a certain advertising cost or charge, because the advertiser knows the reach of that particular morning show, and you factored in and paid it. Now, when you do that really to the communities, the rural communities, what is the implication on revenue, for example? Is there any policy that perhaps the radio stations have come with the local stations for a revenue share? Perhaps we have to look at that, because then, of course, it can also go a long way to help in the sustainability of these community and rural radio stations or TV stations, for example. So we may have to actually look at that. And of course, in terms of these partnerships, between the urban and then the rural stations, for example, how much content must be relayed, for example? I have actually argued that if you have to broadcast maybe the morning shows of Joy or City into a village, you are actually denying the skill development of that particular local radio station in morning show hosting, for example. You've denied them access. So perhaps from sustainability perspective, we must perhaps put in some clauses or get them to say, okay, this is the percentage of content you can actually do, in order that we can protect skill development, we can protect revenue generation, for example, for these community radio stations. In terms of what we call the plurality, or the saturation, if I should put it, that's the right word, the saturation of the media. I remember in England, I remember the Murdoch case, Murdoch versus the Ombudsman case, for example, where Rupert Murdoch was actually asked to reduce his stake in BSkyB because he owns what do you call the Sun newspaper, and then he owns BSkyB. And so the ownership structure was actually changed in order that he doesn't actually control, the minds of the audience, for example. For me, I think that what we can do is that now that we have realized that not every media house is actually set for profitability, some are actually purely, as the street would say, agenda, right? Political agenda, religious agenda, etc. Perhaps we can put in some frameworks to make sure that when people are not actually satisfying that particular framework, of course, Prof has actually made us understand that we cannot license in the media, but we can put in some frameworks in order that they can actually reduce that, proliferation. Because we all agree that is not serving the purpose, whether profitability or the size of the population and the kind of media houses that we have is not serving the purpose, rather generating quite a lot of disturbing issues. For example, we saw young people who had actually killed their friends because they've seen money rituals on TV, and all these things are actually happening. So for me, I think that yes, in addition to the market, which my colleague, PI Eliasu talked about, the market itself can correct it, i.e., let the the SSNIT follow them for SSNIT payments, let them pay the right taxes, etc. People might not see the need to set up a radio station that is not profitable. But we can also do something from a regulatory perspective to measure whether you're actually living up to what you said your station would do and is not doing. And therefore, we can actually weed out the excesses. I think we can actually do that as well. Thank you.
Could you take the microphone? I'll speak to only the content structure and mixed formatting for rural stations and then link it to mergers and acquisitions. Mr. Elias, so Dr. Elias spoke about the fact that the number of licenses are geographically balanced, but they are not economically balanced. There are many places where you cannot run a commercially successful radio station or TV station. That's important to note. So that would mean that if we went the route of mergers and acquisitions, there are stations in some areas that nobody will merge with or acquire. We have to understand. Now, let me follow on from there. He's talked most of these stations who take content from Accra end up depriving the audience of local content. That's not entirely correct. Part formatting and mixed formatting is a standard way of reducing your expenditure and increasing your audience. So you would notice that if you went to a typical peri-urban or rural neighborhood with a local station, they may take a big morning show from Accra, take the news at noon from Accra, but in between, there is a lot of local content. Many of them will follow their midday news that they took from Accra with local news. So that becomes an adjoining or supplementary bulletin to the one that they took from Accra. That's typically what would happen. And then my final point is related to what Honorable Sam George mentioned about the sharing, whether or not the local station will get part of the revenues that the show that was piped from Accra has gotten. Syndication works in many different ways. If you are a station in Ghana, for example, and you wanted international content from one of the top news media outlets across the world, most of them do not charge you money to allow you to be a rebroadcaster, but you've still got to meet certain standards. If you don't meet them, you don't get their license. If you are in breach, they would suspend the license. That's the way it works. Now, locally, assuming that an Accra-based big station is recognized by a local station in my village and wants their content, they would typically have to either be approached or be the ones who approach. Now, if you approach somebody and said, oh, senior, I wanted your midday news, it would then not be in your power to say, and can I get a share of the advertising? When the reverse happens, typically, they would let you know where the advertising blocks are and let you know the length of the advert blocks. So, for example, you will know that 30 minutes into the program, there's a 5-minute advertising block, and they will let you know that the first 3 minutes are national advertising. If you block them out, I will stop giving you my feed. And so he may have 5 minutes of advertising, out of which 3 minutes of it you can't touch. But the last 2 minutes, you can sell your own local advertising too. So there are various models when it comes to syndication. And it comes down to negotiation power and your own skills as a person.
Right, thank you.
So maybe just a few quick points. But one is the fact that this whole research and conversation is about, in the end, media governance. And the questions of ownership and commercial viability are only routes to that conversation of governance. I think we should move away from the worry about who owns media and rather focus a lot more on the enforcement of the standards. Because it is, in my view, legitimate for a church, for a mosque, for another religious group, for a company that believes that it can forward or rather backward or side integrate by acquiring a media house to reduce its marketing costs, so to do. Even a politician to pursue a political agenda, so to do. What is rather more important, in my view, is what are the standards? And that brings me to the question of the regulators. And I keep making the point that we have to put a lot more pressure and support behind the regulators so that they will do the enforcement of the standards. If we get them to do that, we may not want to worry about the producer of a chocolate drink owning a media house and running their adverts on their media house. What we worry about is that, is it the standard that he or she as a result should deny a competing brand the opportunity to advertise? If that is a standard, then we enforce it for the purposes of advertising his chocolates. That's number one. Number two, I want to agree with my colleague Sam George that there are other ways by which the saturation can be dealt with. I saw the look on Prof's face. She just looked at me, what are you going to say? Prof, I think one of the ways is by encouraging unionization of staff. Now, Prof agrees with me.
And I would love to get the thoughts of Mr. Nyama on that.
Very well. Because it then brings the practitioners in media houses to the table, where they can participate properly in the conversation about wages and salaries. And if those form part of a collective bargaining agreement, they become some sort of minimum or moral suasion standards that the media houses must comply with, and those who are not able to meet these standards will then have some more difficulty in operating. The problem, however, is that the media owners deny media practitioners the opportunity to unionize. In fact, if you speak about unionization in a media house, you may be sacked. I have a lot of colleagues who are here. They will tell you. So I think that it is one of the ways we should craftily encourage unionization so that they have a bigger say, a better say at the table. That will also put responsibility on them. You cannot ask for a staff cost of 40% of expenditure, which is equal in nominal value to, let's say, 100,000 cedis, when you are not bringing in revenue equal to that amount. We have a lot of colleagues who say, I play music. I'm good. I've come to play my music. Pay me X amount of money because some other station will pay me that amount of money. But if you unionize and if you are doing this collective bargaining, you are brought to the table of the question, what is your responsibility to ensure that we meet these revenue targets? Number three, syndication. So if you plot a syndication, and I'm using this I'm borrowing it from economics. If you were to plot a syndication possibility line, at the extreme, you should be able to find giant media houses that will say, I will acquire a media house in this particular area, not because I expect to make or break even there, but because if I had it as part of my portfolio, I'll be able to command a comparatively higher reach in terms of revenue. That's at the extreme. But what syndication at higher levels will allow you to do will be to reduce costs at the local station levels. You may not have to hire the same number of staff, etc. In fact, even in television, those who are not doing a lot of production but are just playing productions that are free online are operating at lower cost than those who are doing full-scale production. So it can help reduce some of the costs and deal with the question of financial viability. My next point, and then I'll wrap up. The Ghanaian economy in 2021 was valued around $77 billion. Part of the reason for which not all of it is finding its way into the media is because a lot of the content we are producing does not answer the question of these businesses. How much content are we producing to answer the question of the Abosokai spare parts dealers that you are talking about? Or are we just doing content that is political or telenovela or whatever, but doesn't answer their question? Because if it doesn't answer their question, their products and services may not necessarily find expression on our media platforms. But that 77 billion, though everybody is thinking that government should be advertising and spending money, that 77 billion is mostly from the private sector. $77 billion worth of economic productivity. So we in the media also have to ask ourselves, how are we generating content that aligns and meets the interest of this $77 billion so that we can be more creative and attract that one? And then very finally, in the draft of the broadcasting bill, we have a provision for what we call the Public Service Broadcasting Fund, which, again, if we are successful in getting it through the stages, will then also help community stations that are doing public service broadcasting, or even some commercial stations that are doing public service broadcasting. Because public service broadcasting is not a preserve of state-owned media. Thank you. Unfortunately, Honorable Fati and I have to run to another engagement, so we'll be begging to take leave of you.
We're actually also just wrapping up here. But there's a hand up at the back, so I will just take those comments real quick, please, because we have to wrap up. Oh, but before that, I'll come to you. Before that, Mr. Alfred Chiayabwa is a very close friend to the media. He's been sitting through, and I think it's fair that we get some thought from him. So please, not to put you on the spot, sir, but you've been sitting through. That's the Deputy Attorney General.
Thank you very much. I think my interest lies in those who use the social media space and the liability or responsibility that arises therefrom. Like, for example, you have your network on Facebook and someone posts a comment that's defamatory. I think that issue came up and we have to hold the station liable. Is that the case? The answer has been given and I endorse that answer. Now you owe that kind of responsibility to ensure that those who comment on your media space, they are people that you can identify. I mean, it's very difficult. If you cannot identify and I'm defamed, then I will sue you because you have given the space to that person to defame me. That's how come the responsibility arises. The last point about the Honorable Sam George. I've been looking at Article 1623 of the Constitution on the need not to have alliances. I know about the Radio II case. I think it's a provision that we need to look at once again. It talks about no need to have alliance before you are given the kind of authority to run a media station. I think Prof said it, that there's no need for alliances, but let's look at that provision once, especially when it can't work. That's what I'm saying. Let's look at that constitutional provision once again. That's the position. Because if you need to have a radio station, something finite, to get a point where you have a block and nobody can have it again, how do you handle it, Prof?
Technology is going, it's almost a moot point. With digitization, anybody is finite. It's not, what's the word? It's infinite. It's infinite. It's not finite anymore. So it's almost a moot point. And I would say don't tamper with the constitutional provision that allows people to establish media without recourse to authority, because usually that authority is political authority and it can be misused.
A lot of us will agree with Prof. Please, can you kindly take the microphone so that we can take our last comment?
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Kofi Abua. I represent the GJA. I think that Article 1623 is thought of by the framers of the Constitution because of the way and manner newspaper licensing laws have been abused in the past to stifle the growth of the media. So there's a good reason why the framers of the Constitution put that clause there. And I agree with Prof. About us using the right word, authorization, because the media, we are for education and information. So we may have some of our students listening to us and they need to know the right things. Having said that, I want to draw attention to the fact that there are some operators on the internet who do not need to go for authorization from the NCA. How do we also regulate them? I recall a few years back when the NCA closed down some radio stations, Radio Gold continued to operate online. And in that regard, they wouldn't need on the research, on the point about the media ownership study you alluded to, done by the Media Foundation for West Africa in 2017. And then also the responses you had from the respondent. I was expecting a reconciliation between the two so that we will get an understanding of the awareness of the respondents about who own the media. And it is very important because that will then enable us to do what Dr. Adjintete had said earlier, media literacy and education. And I also think that I would disagree with the Honorable Minister of Information on the point. I agree that standards are good, but I also think knowing the owners are also very important. If you recall the Munti 3 case, the Supreme Court has stretched its hand as far as reaching out to the directors of the station. So that for me is a clear indication that the owners and their identity are very much important. And I don't see why we should not be forthcoming with that. And then lastly, the research had alluded to the fact that about 70% of the respondents had a diploma or a degree background. And then also you had indicated that when you spoke to bloggers, they said because they do entertainment and sports, they didn't care about ethics. I want to know whether you established the education background of bloggers, those you spoke to, so that we can appreciate why they don't give regard to ethics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Dr. Eliasu, this one you have to box it, and it has to be like a quick wrap.
Thank you. Yes, so your first question, whether or not those who can operate online, how do we actually regulate them? That is very difficult. I think the regulation that over the years we've been talking about is about legacy media. And you heard the Honorable Minister said that the earlier draft bill was not inclusive of social media, and that this particular redraft is including that and some of the complexities that social media and other traditional media operations will come with. However, we suggested that we should be able to go for a form of a framework that allows users as in those in the demand and supply direction, to each get what is due them. So, for instance, I don't know whether you followed the Cat Williams interview on Sheshe, which is actually currently driving the entire entertainment industry in the United States. It was just through podcast, not in the normal traditional media. But then the type of attention, that particular interview is having means that, for instance, for us in this part of the country, we really need, in the continent, we really need to relook at that. And that doesn't mean we are going for regulation, but looking at how to make, for instance, if you take the cybersecurity law, how do we make sure that if you pass on a certain comment or you produce a certain content on social media like Facebook and Instagram and it is not appropriate, what are the trigger points should we go in for? Cybersecurity law exists, the Data Protection Act exists, so we will then have to pick these pieces together and then make sure we go after you as an individual or a group who are trying to, cause any form of disinformation to all of us. And I think the Media Foundation for West Africa, if you look at their study, the basic thing they did was actually to look for specific names of owners. In our case, actually, we just zone it into business, the political group, the religious group. We were not very specific in terms of asking who is the person behind this particular media platform and all that. But it's something that going forward can be done so that we will see the faces behind these platforms for probably gatekeeping reasons and sanitization. Thank you.
Qualification of bloggers?
Yes, so actually the qualification of the bloggers, we really didn't glean it into that form to know that maybe the 10 who responded to this, that because we are only on entertainment and sports news, we wouldn't be focusing much on ethics. We actually didn't do that. And if you go through, you realize that focusing on ethics comes with this dilly-dally thing from our observation. They have the academic training all right. They have the newsroom guidance all right. Yet because of clickbaits, because of traffic, because of sensationalism, because of trying to break the news first, they know the codes, yet they will go ahead. And so consciously, we really, in some cases, it will have nothing to do with media literacy. It will have nothing to do with ignorance. But it is just based on the benefit they will be driving in acting in the way that they know is not appropriate. Yet they are going ahead to do that. And it's also because we've not been focusing our attention to those bloggers who are into. We think because it's for those people in that arena. And once it's not about a politician or the business community and other technical people, there isn't much focus in that. But it's high time we did that.
All right. Dr. Eliaso will be available after this session if you want an exclusive with him. And then as well as Dr. Kobe Mensah if you want any follow-ups. But for now, we want to say thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Alfred